good fortune to be on the Open Space Committee and also your elected representative for the Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District. Wow. Thank you for voting for me. I will call it MROSD in the future, or Mid-Pen, or the district, because Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District is very long in making an introduction. But I want to tell you this evening has been put together by the Open Space Committee. This is the 5th in a series of Living with the Animals in the Hills. And we also have been joined not only by the district, but also by Hidden Villa. And Hidden Villa is here, and you've probably seen their great display in the back. And I want you to know Mary Powell, who is hidden there. Here she is, wonderful. She is the new community programs manager for Hidden Villa, and she has 5 new programs for adults that she is creating for all of us in Hidden Villa and the area. So we're delighted to welcome you, and maybe you will find a program that suits your interests at Hidden Villa. We also have members of the committee from the Open Space Committee here this evening. And I want you to stand and be recognized for all that you do for the community. Don't be shy. Stand up. There. Good. Great. They do a marvelous job in helping preserve and manage and steward the open space in the town. We also are pleased this evening to have a representative from the Open Space District who is going to participate, and I'll give you an introduction to him later on. But right now, I want to tell you what the agenda for the evening is. We always run a little late in California. It's our want to be fashionably late in starting, but here you are, so we'll try and stay within the schedule. We'll first start off by having a major speech from our major guest, our featured guest, Camilla Fox, and then that will be followed by a short presentation from Clayton Coupland, who is the district's ecologist for rangeland. And then we'll have a show about the coyote that was made and put together by Camilla Fox, our featured speaker this evening. The show will be called American Coyote, Still Wild at Heart. A little bit different than the plate that's being passed around. And the last half hour will be spent with questions and answers. And we'll try and make it out of here by around 9 o'clock. Okay, that's the program for the evening. Now I want to say a few words about our featured speaker this evening. You will find her enchanting and interesting and full of life. She's been involved for more than 15 years in protecting wildlife and wild lands, not only in this country, but internationally. She has served in leadership positions with the Animal Protection Institute, Fur Bearer Defenders, and Rainforest Action Network. As the founding director of Project Coyote and a wildlife consultant for the American Welfare Institute, Camilla assists community agencies, wildlife managers, and non-governmental organizations, NGOs, in creating innovative solutions to help people and wildlife coexist. She has authored more than 60 publications and is co-author of Coyotes in Our Midst, Coexisting with an Adaptable and Resilient Carnivore, and co-editor and lead author of the book Cull of the Wild, a contemporary analysis of trapping in the United States. She has been featured in several national and international publications, including documentaries in Germany and this country, and she's also been interviewed by the New York Times, BBC, NPR, Orion, USA Today magazine, and our local Bay Nature magazine. Camilla holds a master's degree in environmental studies with a focus on wildlife conservation, policy, and ecology from Prescott College in Arizona. She has served as an appointed member on the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture's National Wildlife Service Advisory Committee and currently serves on several advisory boards for international, national, and local non-government agencies. In 2006, Camilla received the Humanitarian of the Year Award from Marin County Humane Society and the Christian Stevens Wildlife Award from the Animal Welfare Institute. Please join with me and welcome Camilla Fox as our featured presenter.
Thank you, Mary. Just a quick little correction there because I don't want to take credit for it, but the film we're going to show you, American Coyote Still Wild at Heart, I didn't actually produce that film. It's Melissa Peabody who's the film producer. A recently released film, very excited to screen it here tonight, 30 minutes long, hope you can stay for it. I think you'll really enjoy it. And I also just want to thank you all for coming tonight. I know it's a beautiful spring night, and it's one of those nights when you want to be outside walking and enjoying and gardening, so thanks for coming here and listening. And I hope you'll get a lot out of the evening. And I also really want to thank the sponsors tonight because, as you'll hear in my talk, I think it's so vitally important that we have forums like this and we have educational opportunities to learn more about our native urban wildlife, about their ecology, their behavior, and ways that we can mitigate negative encounters. So enjoy the evening. Do I need to turn this on? I'll turn it on. You can tell me if it's, is that better? That's good. Okay, great. You can turn it down a notch. That's good. That's great. Is that okay for the recording?
Yeah, I'll have a silhouette.
Great. So I'm going to start out with some basic coyote ecology, biology 101. I think it's important just to know some basics about coyotes. Coyote is native to North America and the most common large carnivore in the U.S. today. Its native, or its Latin name, Canis latrans, means barking dog, literally, also known as the song dog. And the coyote essentially occupies a biological niche between wolves and foxes. They are very similar to wolves and dogs in different ways. Unlike wolves, but like dogs, they actually have sweat glands on their foot pads, and they can also interbreed with both wolves and dogs. And I'll talk a little bit more about how often that occurs or not, but they are able to physically interbreed with both dogs and wolves. And unlike wolves, they have actually thrived in the face of human persecution. As many of you probably know, wolves were extirpated from much of their range in the U.S. This is back in the early part of the century and mid-19th century, 20th century. And as you probably also are aware, we are slowly bringing wolves back to their original range. But coyotes, unlike wolves, have actually been able to thrive in urban humanized landscapes for reasons I will tell you more about tonight. Now this map is probably the best there is right now, but it's a little off, and I'm going to explain what's off about it. But the dark part is the original coyote range pre-1850. The light gray is where they have expanded. They've actually expanded their range threefold since the mid-1800s. They now go up into Alaska, down into Panama, from Santa Monica over to New York. In fact, a couple of coyotes have been spotted in Central Park in the last couple of years. What's not so accurate about this map is that, and I'm going to show here, coyotes were actually found by the earliest European explorers to be present in Southern California, even in the 1700s. And the La Brea tar pits in LA have actually shown coyote bones. This picture here is from within the museum there. And so this dates back to the Pleistocene area of 40,000 to 10,000 years ago. So coyotes have a long history, and I will preface that with a coyote-like specimen. Whether it's an identical species to the coyote that we call the coyote today is in question. But a very similar coyote-like specimen existed thousands of years ago. And I should mention, too, that right now there are approximately 19 subspecies identified of coyotes in North America and Central America. So to give a little bit about the coyote life cycle, because it's really, it's fascinating for one, and two, it's really important to understand and know the coyote life cycle to better understand when you may see more coyotes and when there may be more of a potential for negative encounters. So right now is the time that coyotes are generally breeding. In California, it's more, February is the general time, but it can stretch from January to March. Their gestation period is about 60 to 63 days. So we'll start seeing pups spring, early summer. And the pups are born, they're altricial, which means that they're dependent on their parents. Their eyes are closed, and both parents are very good at being parents. They provision the young, they take care of the young, fathers included. And they will have very large litters, been documented up to 19. But, however, the average is about 6. And within that first year or two, there is a 50 to 70% mortality rate. So you may hear those high numbers, but just as in much of nature, there's compensatory mortality, compensatory breeding to allow for that high mortality rate. Their eyes open. This is just right after opening that top pup up there. That's about 10 days. And then they're fully weaned about 35 days from birth. And at that time, they're fed. Essentially, the parents will come back, both mom and dad will come back, and the pups will start licking at their lips, the parents' lips, and that will elicit regurgitation, throwing up, which is how they then eat until they're taught how to go out and hunt and feed on their own. So then about 6 to 9 months come fall, the males will start to disperse. The females too, but the females may stay with the family group and actually comprise the pack. So that's when we talk about family packs, coyote packs or coyote family groups, we're often talking about an alpha mother and father, who are generally the sole breeders and the sole provisioners. And then we're often talking about the female young from the year's previous litter. And then they reach full maturity at about 12 months. So these are the general activities that I just mentioned. But what's really important is to look at these time frames, because as someone who's worked on human carnivore conflicts, human coyote conflicts for over a decade, I can tell you the spikes that we get are very seasonal. And Clayton can probably speak to this as well. I know a lot of people associated with humane societies and animal control shelters will speak to this time seasonal component of coyote negative encounters. And what happens is, during the breeding season, denning season, coyotes become a little bit more territorial. And during that time of mating, obviously they're looking for mates, and they may actually view dogs as potential mates. So there, particularly when you're out walking your dogs, you really want to be much more vigilant. That means, walking your dog on a leash and making sure your animals are safe. Because during these times, coyotes, as any predator, will be more defensive and more territorial. So during that denning time as well, when they're provisioning their pups, they will be protecting their den sites. So if you have a dog off leash, and that dog is curious, as any canid is, they may be looking, and sniffing and smelling, and they'll be smelling if coyotes have been out there. And if they're attracted to that den site, that's when you get the parents that may come out and be more territorial and more aggressive. And then during summer, we often see a little bit more of a lull in terms of calls, but that's when the young are coming out. But again, it's a time to be vigilant with your dogs, because those pups, parents again, can be protective of their young. And then fall is often another time when we start to hear more calls, and this is the time when the males are going out and they're spreading their wings, they're going out, they're looking for their territory. So now you have more what are called solitary transients along the landscape that are looking for mates or looking to establish new territories. So again, another time when there may be more sightings, more potential for conflicts. So when I talk about a pack can be anywhere from 3 animals, that alpha female and male, and another up to 12 and 18 have been documented in the wild. But generally it's about 3 to 6 for a family pack or family group. They can exist as I mentioned, solitary individuals, transients or floaters they're often referred to, as pairs. We often see them as pairs, and they will be monogamous for much of their life. And then we do see them in some family groups. Now I mentioned the other aspect that's really interesting is that in addition to the alpha pair, those females that are part of the pack, so either from the previous litter or from outside that have come and formed part of that pack, are generally behaviorally sterile. So when you have that alpha pair, they are the breeders, as I mentioned, and the provisioners. And so those females, generally in an unexploited pack, family pack, will remain behaviorally sterile. Diet. Generally, coyotes are very oriented towards rodents and lagomorphs, so that's hares and rabbits. Some studies indicate that component of their diet can be up to 90% of their diet. But they're also opportunists. They will eat just about anything. They'll eat fruit, they'll eat lizards, nuts, snakes, insects, birds, garbage, compost, pet food, and certainly, as many of you probably know, sometimes small animals, domestic animals, and that's where the conflicts really start to arise. So as opportunists, as generalists, that's why they've been so successful, because they can eat almost anything. They are able to exist and persist in urban, fragmented, humanized landscapes because of that ability to take advantage of any food sources. And again, it's another reason why we need to be vigilant and understand what they do consume to know what we need to keep off the ground, keep away, and how we keep our yards and our neighborhoods clean. So some interesting studies have come out showing that coyotes can be a keystone predator, essentially, in certain urbanized human landscapes, acting as the top predator, so replacing the role of the other predators that used to exist there, such as wolves, mountain lions. And as a top carnivore, they can have what's called a top-down effect on the ecosystem. And in a seminal study in the fragmented area of San Diego showed that an absence of coyotes actually led to a proliferation of mesocarnivores, so foxes, raccoons, skunks, feral cats. And this in turn, these larger numbers of mesocarnivores can in turn have a profound effect on the ground nesting bird species. So the ultimate take-home message from that is that when you have a balanced ecosystem and you have the larger carnivores such as coyotes within that ecosystem, you're going to have a balance overall with the number of mesocarnivores and the ground nesting and songbird species as well. In addition, coyotes are scavengers. So, as I mentioned, all the live things that they eat, they also eat carrion. And in that way, they actually provide an ecosystem service, if you will, by keeping our areas, our environments clean of carrion. A seminal study, 2007, by Dr. Stanley Gert. He's a researcher out of Chicago. He's overseen the longest ever urban coyote study in North America. It's now in its 9th year. He wrote a seminal study looking at 8 or 9 urban coyote studies in North America. So I'm going to provide some of the summaries of what he found tonight because I think it's really important. While there have been many coyote studies looking at coyotes in rural areas, there have been far fewer in urban landscapes. So what he did was he looked at their collective conclusions, and that's some of what I'm going to share with you tonight. So he says, although the coyote is one of the most studied canids in North America, our understanding as to what extent the coyote becomes successful in urbanized landscapes remains limited. There has been a paucity of research on coyotes in urban areas. I mentioned coyotes may function as keystone predators. Primary causes of mortality in urban landscapes appear to be cars. And we're finding a seminal study here in California found that rodenticides were actually a fairly common factor in mortality. Whether it was the causative factor is questionable, but when the necropsies were done of the coyotes, their livers were found to be quite full of rodenticides, anticoagulants. And these are from over-the-counter rodenticides that you and I, not me, but hopefully not you too, but that can be purchased and be very deleterious. I know that there was a forum here on rats where some of the poison issues were discussed, and it's of concern when we see that these over-the-counter poisons that we can purchase can persist in the environment and affect other wild animals. This study also showed that some of the coyotes that were predated by cougars, that those cougars died from the rodenticide. So there was secondary and tertiary effects in these coyotes that had consumed the rodenticide where there was anticoagulants in the liver. So very persistent in the environment and in certain mammalian species. So one of the questions has been, gee, I see a coyote during the day, it must be rabid, must be sick. They can be diurnal and nocturnal. The studies that Stan Gert evaluated show that overall a trend in coyotes in urban landscapes is that they become more nocturnal, and the assumption from that is that it's to avoid human use and cars. And so that coyotes are trying to do all that they can to avoid people and to avoid times when there are many cars out on the road. But it doesn't mean that if you see a coyote during the day that coyote is sick. That is normal behavior in rural landscapes. They actually do hunt during the day as well as the night. Mean home range size. Very interesting comparative analysis between rural landscapes and urban landscapes. It appears from the data that they have smaller home ranges in urban landscapes, larger in rural, which would make sense because when you think about the plethora of food, water, habitat that's available in an urban landscape comparatively, therefore the territories and the home range sizes would likely be smaller. Another interesting finding, those solitary individuals I talked about, they can move. 15 to 20 miles in a night. For those of you, I'm using square kilometers for some and miles for some, depending on how your head works. But 15 to 20 miles one can picture is a great distance. And so in the Chicago study, they showed that some of these animal control facilities and humane societies would get phone calls about coyote sightings, and from several different townships. And so the thought was, gee, there must be so many coyotes out there. Well, this was one solitary coyote that traveled through 5 townships over the course of the night. So we may perceive that there are all these coyotes out there. And another reason, because they have 11 vocalizations, and you can have 2 or 3 that start yipping and yelping and barking And we think, oh my gosh, there must be this huge pack of coyotes out there, when in fact there are just 2 or 3 that are doing their little dusk talk to each other. They talk to each other to say, hey, I'm over here, this is my territory, or hey, I'm going out hunting, this is where I'll be, kind of thing. So we have this perception that coyotes are all over, when in fact, from the urban coyote studies that are coming out, there may be fewer than we actually think, because of the fact that they do have large home ranges, and because they have incredible vocalizations. So the interesting thing that's coming out of the Chicago study as well is that the whole Cook County area, which is the Chicago metropolitan area, almost every single green space has some coyotes in it. And people don't know. They've documented with cameras, people coming out of post offices, and the coyotes are just maybe a quarter of a mile. They're hanging out in their green space, and this is kind of their denning place. But they're there, and people are absolutely oblivious. And that's probably the case around here. There are probably several cougars as well. I mean, this is perfect wildlife habitat down here. But the point is that these animals are actually coexisting with us, and they're there, and how often we see them relative to how many there probably are, and how often they see us, is quite minuscule. And that's why this study out of Chicago is just fascinating, some of the things they're finding. They also found one coyote pack that was 12 individuals in this one green patch area that was in downtown metropolitan Chicago. Just amazing, really amazing. And what they're looking at now, too, which is fascinating, is how many of those collared animals become nuisance coyotes. Because we want to know, okay, so how many of all these coyotes that are living out there really become problems? Really become problems where we feel like we need to remove them. And they're finding that it's a very, very small number for the number that they have actually collared there. And they've collared, at any given time, 200 to 300. And the last statistic I had seen was of 200 and something, I want to say 220, that approximately 5 had become nuisance animals. Not all meaning that they had to be removed, but that they had started to become habituated, meaning intentional, unintentional feeding going on, or coming into contact with a lot of domestic animals. So relatively small. And again, I'm not saying that's everywhere, extrapolating everywhere, but this is from that study. So with the territories, I think this is also an important point, because people say, well, gee, aren't they just going to overrun my area? They have territories, and like all predators, they defend those territories. They mark and defend those territories. So they'll go around, they'll do their thing, they'll mark, they'll let the other male coyotes know, this is my area. And they're also telling the dogs, too, this is my area. So that actually ensures that you don't get an overabundance of these animals, biological carrying capacity of an area. So as I've mentioned, they're an adaptable, opportunistic omnivore, so they can really eke out a living pretty much anywhere. And our urban landscapes really provide that, a plethora of food, plethora of water, particularly in drought times, and of habitat. All the things I mentioned about what's available, you might not think that, gee, my dirty grill might be a draw to coyotes. You might not think, gee, my apricot tree, my peach tree, when it drops its fruit, might be a draw. You might not think that my irrigation system or my koi pond, actually during drought time, may be a draw. Not just to coyotes, but to all wildlife. So some of the mitigation measures I'm going to mention also apply to other animals. And it's just thinking about how do we coexist in a way that appreciates these animals, but doesn't create a situation where we're going to end up in conflict. So another interesting point from Stanley Gird's findings, dietary studies of coyotes in urbanized areas have typically reported diets dominated by small mammals, rodents, lagomorphs, those are bunnies, hares. Coyote predation on pets is a major contributor to human-coyote conflicts, but domestic cat or dog are consistently found in low frequencies in dietary studies. And this is an important point because a lot of people will say, gee, they must be, relying on dogs and cats to persist, to exist, to live. When in fact, most of the studies show that if there are dog and cat remains in coyotes, it's usually more of an opportunistic kind of finding. Now this does vary across the studies. This is a generalization from the studies that he analyzed. So much of it will be site-specific. But across the studies that he looked at, for the most part, you're still looking at a high rate of rodents as a primary food source in urban landscapes. So this was another different study in New York. Interesting finding. We don't see as much here, but the coyotes in the east are often larger, and they think that that's because interbreeding with wolves. There's a lot of genetic dispute within scientists right now about how accurate. There's quite a bit of agreement that there's some kind of interbreeding with wolves, but whether it's red wolves or gray wolves, whether it's western coyotes, there's a lot of unknown things right now. It's a really, really fascinating debate, actually, because it brings up management issues around a species. Gray wolves are still listed as endangered in a lot of eastern, northeastern states, so there's a lot of management implications. But one of the things that they're finding in the East Coast studies is that white-tailed deer in some areas will actually be a major food source during certain times of the year, primarily winter, fall time. So this study found that most coyotes avoid human interaction by selecting for natural habitats and food sources. Some coyotes incidentally travel through residential areas and infrequently cause conflicts by opportunistically foraging for cats or have territorial disputes with dogs. Again, they use these travel corridors. They often use power lines or railroad tracks. And so opportunistically, if they find a dog or cat, they may consume that dog or cat. Few suburban coyotes demonstrated bold behavior towards people, and most conflicts were associated with coyote-pet interactions. And that's been my experience working on this issue for quite a while, is that when you have negative situations, encounters, conflicts, it really is precipitated by an interaction with a dog or cat. From Gert's study, the picture that emerges is of an animal that largely avoids people, either temporally or spatially, even while living in close proximity to them within the urban landscape. This is in sharp contrast to the picture of coyotes drawn from only media accounts that necessarily focus on human-coyote incidents. And I think this is so true because when you look at a lot of the stories that come out in the media, there's a lot of fear-mongering, whether it's about a mountain lion conflict, a coyote conflict. We don't hear of all the other times that we go hiking and we have this amazing experience getting a glimpse of a mountain lion or a coyote or a bobcat. What if we did? Imagine how many more there would be, but that's not scintillating, controversial news. So what we hear about are the conflicts, and then we think, oh my God, we're being overrun by mountain lions and coyotes. When in fact, the media is not really helping us learn how to coexist and mitigate negative encounters. So I'm hoping through forums like this, through the use of proactive ways of using the media, getting op-eds and calling the media and saying, hey, could we do a piece locally to tell people how to coexist with wildlife? That's part of what the organization that I started, Project Coyote, is doing nationally. And I think that's ultimately where we need to go, given growing populations, given the fact that urban sprawl is a reality, and given the fact that we will have urban wildlife here, and it's a matter of figuring out how we're going to coexist. So some of the themes that Gert has found and other researchers have found, and I have found in my work on this, is that there really is a lack of knowledge and general understanding about coyotes and other predators. And the fear of human attack is disproportional to the real threat. There was one fatal coyote attack in recorded history in the U.S. It's an interesting story. It was a family in an area where coyotes were being directly fed. It was a very tragic situation, but it's one that points to the real contentious or issues around feeding, intentional feeding and unintentional feeding. On average, dogs kill 20 to 25 people each year. Nearly 4.5 million dog bites occur annually in the U.S. 3 million children are bitten. And there's a high correlation between human-coyote conflicts and intentional and unintentional feeding of coyotes, anthropogenic food sources. And as I mentioned, we really have a lot more coyotes around us than we actually know in a lot of our landscapes. I'm just going to mention this study briefly because I think it's really interesting. Master's student did her master's on the East Coast looking at animal control officers and some of their experiences handling coyote-related issues. And some of these findings I have found in other regions throughout the U.S. as well. And I think it informs kind of why we get to this place sometimes of problems and we haven't done the proactive kind of work that needs to be done, like forums like this. So ACO is Animal Control Officer. Basically the summation here is that animal control officers often aren't trained in how to deal with wildlife conflicts. They're trained with how to deal with dog and cat issues, but they're the ones who get the first phone call about, oh my gosh, I saw a coyote, oh my gosh, I saw a mountain lion. They're not trained, they don't know what to do, they feel ill-equipped. They also find fear and ignorance. This was a quote from the thesis, and this was actually from a survey of the ACOs, is that there's an inordinate amount of misinformation, ignorance, I don't really like that word, but misinformed, uninformed, and fear. And I think we understandably have visceral fear of predators. That's understandable. We're part of the food chain. So understanding how to deal, the human dimensions aspect of how to deal with that fear as an animal control officer, as the first person who's going to get that first phone call is absolutely important nationally. I will back up here, but essentially these are some of the points that came out. I saw the coyote in the daytime, it must be rabid. There's little incentive for the public to become educated and a reluctance to even attempt to coexist. I don't want to know about it, just trying to fix the problem, come make the animal go away, take it somewhere else, relocate it. And then the media fear-mongering stories. And this was something that the animal control officers themselves said is, these media stories don't help us. They don't help us in our job. So I'm going to just skim through this. But unfortunately, often the response to coyotes in our communities is, oh my gosh, got to get a trap, got to get a pest control trapper, and remove the coyotes. And often the community politicians feel that they, calls will start to come in, and then they'll say, I got to do something, go get someone to remove the coyotes. And that is unfortunately a reactive situation that I see time and time again happening all over. And it's multiple factors. It's the factor of the ACOs not being trained. It's the factor of not having a big, broader picture of how are we going to educate on a big picture our community about wildlife. You're all here. You're all, I'm probably in many ways preaching to the choir, but what about all the people who don't, really think about wildlife and think about or want to know about behavior so that if they do see a coyote and they're walking their dog, they know what to do. And those are the people that we really, really need to reach. So, unfortunately, the situation often happens. A pest control trapper is brought in. They do a population suppression. And because coyotes biologically are able to rebound very quickly, they can have larger litter sizes. If the prey base and the habitat still exist, they will rebound quite quickly, a lot of studies show. And the time frame depends, but it's not a long-term solution, population suppression. And most of the scientific research that's coming out now acknowledges that. And this is just to show coyote is the most persecuted native carnivore in the U.S. today. Just in 2007, USDA Wildlife Services, which is a federal agency that does federal predator control in the U.S., in California alone, they killed 7,759 coyotes in 1 year. Nationwide, 90,416 coyotes. Primary methods in California for 2007, aerial gunning and snaring, among other methods. But again, not often done prophylactically for the benefit of livestock ranchers, meaning that they'll go out and aerial gun pre-spring lambing to reduce the population. Temporary, coyotes come back, do it every year, job security. Not a long-term approach. one study that looked at, peer-reviewed study that looked at predator control programs actually internationally, found that non-target animals often fall victim to control operations, and between 30% and 81.3% of the carnivores killed in control operations bore no evidence of involvement in conflicts. Really important factor, because when those snares and indiscriminate methods are set, often it's not known whether the problem animal, if there was a problem animal, is actually taken. This is a hard piece to see, but it's important to know that this is often what does happen with these indiscriminate traps. Just want to show one because it is the reality, and it's important that we know the reality. Some of Gert's findings on the issue of control, because it's a very important issue to understand in the big picture here. First, if problem coyotes are removed, they are likely to be replaced by solitary coyotes floating across the landscape, regardless of where the site is located. We have observed resident coyotes lost to mortality replaced by new coyotes within a few weeks. Thus, it is important to determine why problems occurred, particularly if wildlife feeding is going on, and address these prior to removal. Otherwise, removal will only be a temporary solution. Second, if coyotes are removed that are not really causing problems, such as in general population reduction, they will be replaced with new coyotes that may or may not have a fear of people. Thus, indiscriminate removal may exacerbate a conflict if coyotes that have a healthy fear of people are replaced by new coyotes that have little or no fear of people. Therefore, removal should be discouraged if actual conflicts have not yet occurred, and management should focus on public education. And that's why I started to read those two, but I think those are really important quotes coming from really one of the preeminent urban coyote researchers. And that's, someone who's been doing this for over 15 years, 9 years with the urban coyote study in Chicago, but he knows what he's talking about. And I think we need to look at that in the big picture of how we're going to coexist with this animal. Oops. Did I just miss a slide? Yeah. Okay. Is that what yeah, okay. So part of what Project Coyote puts out there, and really what we try to do is help communities, just like this, help communities before you get to a situation where, oh my gosh, there's this coyote out there and several cats have disappeared and there have been dog conflicts and what do we do, we have people screaming to have coyotes removed. This is the kind of action that needs to take place, and I, again, commend the people and the sponsors of this, because more of these need to take place throughout this whole region. Clayton's going to talk about some of the work that they've done. They've done proactive outreach. I think this community is really starting to look at this holistically, and I commend you for that. So starting from the bottom up, not the top down, bottom up, sort of the grassroots approach as opposed to the predator control, which is top down, let's go, wham down the population and see if that does anything. I've involved diverse stakeholders, those who are pro, anti, in between, need them all, need all the voices. And then a really important point is I think that every coexistence plan needs to be tailored to that community, because different situations occur all over. And while one may need more signs, I'm working with different communities right now that have lots of open space, and so we're putting signs on all the trailheads. And then for other places where there are a lot of summer visitors, we're putting up signs that can be taken down and that may have multiple different languages. So all those types of plans and specific techniques and strategies need to be tailored to a community. Public education, long-term solutions, absolutely essential. And another thing that I experienced is that, oh gee, we had a bunch of phone calls about coyotes, let's do something, send out a few brochures, have a community forum, and nothing. And then a year later, more calls, few brochures and everything. It has to be consistent, and it has to be through a whole variety of methods. There has to be commitment there. And probably most importantly, the intentional, unintentional feeding is so important, because while you may clean up your yard, make sure your compost piles are covered, your grills are clean, fruits picked up, if your neighbor is out there deliberately feeding coyotes, which does happen, or is leaving their pet food bowls out, that's a problem. And it's not just their problem, it's a community problem. pretty much all the things I just mentioned. Two little points down here. One of the things that we've done with some communities is we've worked with the water districts to actually do an insert. Free mailing, doesn't cost anything. You put in a mailing about living with wildlife, it goes to all the residents. It's a great way to get information out on a regular basis. I mentioned the signs. This is a sign that we did in Marin County. It's now being used in San Francisco as well. Some of the points that I think are really important, I think the Be Coyote Aware is something that grabs you. I always encourage that if there is an ordinance or a state law that is about wildlife feeding, that be mentioned on there. It be mentioned that you can be cited. I think it's good to have a central phone number. What we did in our community was I helped organize basically a stakeholder group. So we involved all the agencies, the associations, the NGOs, sat down and said, okay, how are we going to handle this? Who gets calls? How do you handle them? So sheriff's departments would say, we get calls, we don't really know what to do. Open space, we get calls, we sort of send them here, there, send them out a brochure. So we said, okay, who's going to be the responder? For our community, it was the Humane Society. And everyone agreed that if we get calls, they funnel to them. And then we had a tiered approach about, okay, this is what they're going to do at every level. And then, at the final level, site analysis, site visit. But there's an agreed upon, there's buy-in, which is so important. And I think it's also important to show the different agencies and associations that are involved for credibility with the public. Two things that some communities have also done is in hotspot areas where you have some habituated coyotes. Now this is not, we have not yet had studies that have tested this and tested its efficacy, which is so needed because it's been done with black bears where aversive conditioning has been being used in various state parks, federal parks, Yosemite, other places. Coyotes, similarly, have been vexed in different ways when they get to a place of really being habituated, which is usually caused by intentional feeding by people, where paintball guns and different methods have been used to try to reinstill that fear. So this has been used successfully in some places, and that's anecdotally successful. There has not been, like I said, a bona fide, peer-reviewed study. But it's something that communities can look at, and there are different ways of vexing. Whether it's going out there with a blowhorn, or whether it's going out, some communities, water super soakers. Different ways to basically reinstill that fear and really keep that distance, keeping wildlife wild. So these are just some of the signs that, this is primarily the Presidio area, near a playground, really important. Those kind of signs that I mentioned, that sandwich board signs that can be moved and taken down when needed. Coyote crossing at key points where coyotes have actually mentioned that auto is a major reason for mortality, so important to put where wildlife cross, and then again in a major area where hikers come through. Some other kinds of signs have been used. This is actually a door hanger that I produced, and it's something where you can't see at the top. There's actually a little door hanger thing where it can be taken to hotspot communities. Talks about coyote ecology, ways to mitigate conflicts. So, if there's a take-home message, really coexisting with wildlife and mitigating conflicts is everyone's responsibility. It's an individual responsibility, and it's a community responsibility. And don't expect agencies, whether it's open space or the Humane Society or Sheriff's Department, to take care of the problem. I come from Marin County where there can be somewhat of an elitist attitude sometimes of, oh, there's a predator, wild animal, someone come take care of it, even though my land abuts open space. We need to get beyond that thinking. So some things on the individual level that you can do. A lot of these are on the brochure, but I just want to run through them really quickly. Coyote-proof your garbage cans and compost bins. Place trash bins inside sheds, garages, or other enclosed structures. One of the problems even with garbage pickup, if we have early morning garbage pickup, we work with some communities to actually shift that time of when the garbage is picked up, because you have a whole night of when when garbage cans can be raided. So think about them being out there all night if they're not properly secured. Landscape for safety, clear away bushes and dense weeds near private residences where coyotes can find cover and critters to feed on. You'd be amazed, but actually a lot of houses that have decks where animals can come under, coyotes love that, to actually be able to den. It's a nice, safe place. There's probably a good source of water and food there. So one of the first things we look at when we're doing site visits is to see, okay, is there an invite with even human residents? Close off crawl spaces under porches. Keep your property well lit at night. Consider installing motion activated lights. Coyotes are very, very keen, very smart. They do get used to new methods that we use to try to deter them. But some people have had success with the motion lights, and it's really just sort of keeping things on to say, you know, this isn't a welcome area. Obviously, don't leave cat or dog food out, or even water bowls. People forget kind of about the water source, not just for coyotes, but other animals. Even in Southern California, black bears have been known to come down during drought time from the hills seeking water. So we need to think about what the water sources may be as well. I think absolutely essential to keep your cats safe. I advocate keeping them in for their protection, for protection in general, and obviously with dogs in terms of being off leash, it's absolutely just so essential to be vigilant during those times that I mentioned when coyotes will be more territorial and want to protect their young more, to protect your dogs. And even the flexi leashes, I've heard stories where, you know, these 50-foot flexi leashes and you have a little Bichon Frise, which seems to be the food of choice for coyotes when it comes to a little dog breed. I hate to say that, but it's kind of amazing how many calls I've had with that breed, and I know Humane Societies too, for whatever reason. So the flexi leashes that are really long can be problematic. Spare you neuter your dog for all reasons, but if they're not, they can be more of a lure to coyotes. Coyote fencing, I'm going to mention just briefly. What does coyote fencing mean? Coyote fences, to be truly proof, have to be, this one says 5 feet, but really 6 feet, have to have an overhang and an undergirth. Some of these are more for protection of livestock, but if you really want to protect your backyard, let's say you let your dogs out and you want to ensure that it's coyote proof, it really does need to be to those specs. And we have more information. I have my book, Coyotes in Our Midst, back here, and it does have more on all these methods and also provides websites where you can go for more information. This is a fairly new device, the Coyote roller it's called, and you can see in this picture it actually goes on the top of a fence, and the idea is that the coyote can't get grip to actually get over. I've heard anecdotally that it's effective. Most importantly, appreciate coyotes at a distance. It's so easy. I was talking with Nancy over dinner tonight, and we were talking just, you know, as wildlife appreciators, we don't have this sort of instinctual, gee, let me scare this animal away. We want to just sit and appreciate. And even with our cameras, we want to get closer and get the best shot. But with coyotes, that is not a good thing in urban landscapes. It might be one thing to do that in Yellowstone, Alaska. It's another thing when we have coyotes right in our midst and we're allowing them to get too close. Because for our good and for their good, we need to keep that distance. So what that means is if you're out on a trail and you're feeling that distance might not be as great as you'd like it to be, you should haze, do aversive conditioning. That means yell, shout, create some distance so that that animal goes away. And if you don't do that, and that coyote is getting too close, you're really potentially creating a death knell for that animal and a potential safety issue, public safety issue down the road. So do it for the animals, even though I'm sure most of you are wildlife appreciators, and it goes kind of against what we normally think about when we're around wildlife. Same thing if you see a coyote in your yard, same kind of behavior, yell, shout, scream. Make that not a welcome place for that animal. And do just what you're doing tonight, educate yourself. Again, we have lots of literature back there, but this is the first step to helping with the big picture. More education. Sorry to put poop at the end, but good to know kind of what Coyote Scat looks like. Good to know what Coyote tracks look like, so you know when you're out there what you're looking at. These are all actually Coyote Scat. You can see hair in one, often the narrow tips at the end, sometimes berries in some of them. So it's, I mean, tracking is so much fun. It's so enjoyable, and it's really good to start to know, you know, the different scats and the different tracks, and then you can even know around your house if you have critters visiting. Coyote tracks, a little different from dogs, narrower. Often you see the claw marks. So conclusions. Ultimately, pretty much what I've been repeating tonight, coexistence is possible, but it takes work on all of our part individually and as a community. And to emphasize, it needs to be done prophylactically. It needs to be a long-term approach, not something that's just done reactively. And that's why I think it's so great that this forum is happening, because there was no precursor. There was no, oh my gosh, there's a situation, Camilla, can you come down? It's, gee, we want to educate our community about coyotes and also how neat they are. Again, just mentioning the lethal control, if that is necessary, and you know a problem coyote does start to present itself where there's a definitive public safety hazard, then maybe a coyote needs to be removed. But doing prophylactic population control, or even coming in when there has been a problem and doing population reduction, is not a long-term effective method. And often it's not even a short-term effective method, because you may be removing, as mentioned, you may be removing coyotes that are not problem animals, and therefore leaving a void for other animals to come in and fill. And understand that coyotes play a really vital ecological role. As mentioned, they can be keystone predators in some ecosystems, and as such, they can have a top-down effect and actually help as scavengers as well to provide free ecosystem services. I think this is a great quote. This is from Ryan Broderick, who is our former director of our Fish and Game. It was in the San Diego Tribune, and it really encapsulates what the message I hope you take home tonight. Every encounter that ends with a meal is a lesson to the intelligent coyote. Humans equal food. We all need to take responsibility for the wild animals whose habitat we share. When humans are careless, wild animals may pay the price. So with that, I'll open to questions, and I encourage you to go to our website. Pretty much all over here. I mean, you have such an environment and land. I mean, I went out with Clayton actually and went to different areas around here, and you have just a perfect wildlife habitat. So coyotes could be existing right in this area and denning in this area. They could be denning out in the open space, you know, preserves. So all of this is coyote habitat, really. And it's not just coyote, there's multiple species here that will persist and exist in these kind of areas.
That howling goes on. Is that before a hunt, after a hunt, just because they've been separated?
Often dusk is when...
3 in the morning.
What's that?
3 in the morning.
3 in the morning, okay. That may be after a hunt. I mean, they talk throughout the day, but generally it's more dusk, dawn, night, when you'll hear more vocalizations than bright daylight. And it may be to communicate that we've hunted successfully. It may be that we're going back out on a hunt. And it may just be, this is where we are, this is where we're denning, this is our place, just letting you know this is where we are.
On an intuitive level, you kind of go, if you're that noisy, you're not going to get anybody. You know, it's not going to be that good.
Well, and that's, yeah, I mean, depending on, but they'll travel to go hunt and everything too. But they do want to let each other know kind of where they are, and I mean, there's actually a lot of communication between canines.
Yeah.
A coyote killed my dog. I still love coyotes, but since then, I was told that I have another small dog, which I keep right next to me at all times, but I hear they'll stalk out, because you see them, they're always around. Do they know there's a source, and will they really stick around there until they get it or give up?
Well, if they know that you have a small dog there, they may see that animal as potential prey. They've seen the animal, they've recognized that it's still alive and it's still there. So yes, they may view your dog as potential prey, and it's all the more reason to, yeah, and I'm sorry about your dog before, and it's great that you have the attitude that you have and that you're coming to a forum like this. So, but even more so because, yes, it's like any predator. It's not unique to coyotes. Any predator that recognizes here's a potential food source. Yeah.
In my neighborhood, we had coyote skins nearby in Creek, Arroyo. And some of them were becoming aggressive to neighborhood dogs. And somebody like you came and suggested that the neighborhood take down their bird feeders, because when the seed spills on the ground feeding birds and rodents come, and the coyotes are fed easily. So do you recommend taking down bird feeders?
Yeah, obviously that's a hard one in terms of, I'm a birder, and I like seeing birds and I like having birds around me. I've also dealt with it as I've worked with states and legislators on crafting language for wildlife feeding laws and ordinances, how to deal with feeding birds as well. So one of the things that we often include in language like that in the laws is to maintain bird feeders, I can't remember the exact words, but in a way that keeps them clean and trying to keep the seeds off the ground. So using the types of bird feeders where you really don't get all that debris down, because it is true that they will attract the rodents, and the rodents in turn will attract predators. So it's a good point, and one that I thought that I had up there but need to put back in. So thank you for bringing it up.
I had a question about, you mentioned den, and I know certain other animals what a den looks like. You know, either it's a hole in the ground or it's underneath a rock or something. What does a coyote den look like?
I wish I could go back, because I did have one picture actually there. Did people see it with the coyote? Yeah. So it was one picture where the coyote is sort of under, there's a...
Looked like a storm drain.
Well, actually, there was one with a storm drain, and that was the pups. But there was one where it's, I think it's a juvenile, and there's sort of a tree limb, and then there's actually almost like a den cave area underneath a tree.
So do they excavate it?
They will excavate. They will also take advantage of existing dens, so badger dens, and they will often, actually the mothers will often move their dens. It's something I forgot to mention, but during the young period of when the mother has pups, if she feels disturbed, if she feels her den site has been disturbed, she will often go and move to a new den, and may, in those cases, particularly take advantage of existing dens. So it can be pretty much anywhere. I'll say one more and then, yeah.
We have a lot of deer, and I get to watch them out on the hillside, very close to the house. And often there's a coyote comes along, just a lone coyote. I've seen him lots of times. Should I be rushing out with my hose? I just leave him alone.
Unless you're feeling your personal space invaded, that's a normal situation. That's nature, you know, and most likely that coyote is not going to take down a full-grown deer. When we see here with deer, it will, if they take deer, it will usually be a fawn, or it will be scavenged from roadkill or whatever. So in that situation, I would not intervene. It doesn't sound like you're feeling your personal space is
Well, he's only about 20 yards away, and he's just right down by my window. I just don't follow him out because he's gorgeous, and he just goes off on his own. And
that is nature, and it sounds like you live in a place where, you know, I think if you start to see that coyote, that is a coyote doing what coyotes are supposed to do. If you start to feel that coyote is switching its attention elsewhere or coming too close, then you can start to do some more, you know, aversive conditioning. But in that situation, I'd sit there and I'd enjoy it. Yeah. Thank you.
We have a new piece of information about Chicago and its population. 200 coyotes in downtown Chicago. Can you imagine that? Thanks a lot. Noah. Now, we're going to hear from Clayton Coupland, who is the district's wonderful rangeland ecologist. Clayton is a graduate of UC Davis with a degree in agricultural management and rangeland resources. He is a fifth-generation Californian, and he is a ranch person. His family, the 5 generations, have been in ranching for many years. And as an addition to this background, he is a rodeo participant and actually ropes and rides. So it's very special that he knows about not only riding and watching from a horse, but seeing what's in the ground and what's on the ground in the habitat of the district. We are blessed to have him. His job application for the district was the first one that he actually put in to become an employed person. And we are blessed that we were smart enough to pick this marvelous rancher and rider. And Clayton Coupland will talk to you about what the district is up to. So welcome Clayton with me.
Make me blush with that introduction. My name is Clayton Coupland. I'm the rangeland ecologist for Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District, and I've been with the district since July, so about 8 months, 9 months. And my primary job is to deal with livestock and the grazing, conservation grazing on the district land. And I'm also in charge of wildlife and wildlife interactions. So I'm just going to give you a short presentation kind of on what the district's doing and our procedure and process for wildlife in the preserves. Let me start off with a little bit of background about the district and then go into some of the stuff that we're doing, the monitoring we're doing of wildlife, some of the proactive measures that we've taken, and the wildlife response protocols that we have established over the past 10 to 15 years. And we'll have a few questions at the end. I wanted to start off with the map here. This just kind of shows the area we're in. The dark green is district-owned land. There's a little more added to it recently. And then the lighter green is other publicly owned lands in the area. And you can see right there between where it says Cupertino and Los Altos, that's Rancho San Antonio, and just to the north of that would be Los Altos Hills. So you can see from your backyards, pretty much the ocean is all open space and prime habitat for deer, coyotes, mountain lions, all kinds of wildlife. So that's just one of the deals. They're living on the fringe between town and in the country and the open spaces. There's going to be wildlife around. Mid-Peninsula Open Space District owns and manages approximately 57,000 acres on 26 different preserves. And the purpose and why the district was established was to purchase and protect lands kind of forming a green belt around the South Santa Clara Valley here and in the Santa Cruz Mountains, to protect it from development and from houses. Preserve unspoiled wilderness, to develop and protect habitat for wildlife and for watersheds, and to protect a view shed with your sensitive riparian habitats with the steelhead trout and other fishes. And to provide opportunities for low-intensity recreation, horseback riding, some mountain biking, hiking, allowing you guys access to get out outside of town, close by though, and get out and see nature. And also to provide environmental education to younger kids, like we have a nature center up there off Alpine Road and doing stuff like that. What we're doing now is we monitor the wildlife behavior. We keep detailed records of wildlife encounters, wildlife acting aggressively or abnormally, or just rare sightings. And primarily those reports come in from park or preserve visitors such as yourself if you're out hiking. And you talk to a ranger, file a report with a ranger, and let them know what you saw, and they'll ask you some questions. Or you go ahead and contact the district office, either by telephone or email, and talk to me, and I'll fill out a report. And we keep track of all the reports. We have a database of all the incidents, rare sightings, and we keep that information in the computer there at the office. So we kind of rely on you. It's important if you guys do see stuff, let us know, and that way we have records and we can kind of see if there's a pattern of behavior going on that we need to look out for or take action on. We'll be able to do that. And then I've also set up some trail cameras in the preserves to monitor the presence of different wildlife species and see kind of where they're moving and where they're hanging out. And that's a picture of one of the cameras. You might have seen them hiking in there in Rancho San Antonio. I have a couple set up. And that's just one of the pictures I got of a coyote cruising through in the night. They're pretty good cameras. They tell you the date, time, a bunch of information. So they're pretty neat. You get to see what's out there when you're not around. Some of the proactive measures that we've been taking, recently we had Camilla come out and go around the preserve. Her and I went out and looked at some of the facilities that we have, restrooms, some of the buildings, the farm out there, garbage cans, and just to observe coyote behavior. I don't think we actually saw any coyotes that day. But she put together a nice report for us with some suggestions on stuff that we could improve, properly chaining down the garbage cans and getting coyote-proof lids or garbage cans, and some other stuff. And education. And that's kind of what we're doing here tonight. And we offer brochures on living in areas where the coyotes are present. We have brochures available at the preserves, at the kiosks, some of the kiosks, and they're also available at the district office if you stop by, or if you call in or email, we can send that stuff to you if you want that information. We also have information and signs posted on preserve boards and on the district website regarding coyotes. And if there's recent activity, or if there's been some coyotes acting aggressively, or if there's some denning activity in the area, we'll put up these coyote alert signs, like the one on the left. And then here's just an example of one of the mountain lion signs that we also have posted up in many of the preserves up there. Wildlife response protocols. Basically, these are steps that we've developed to follow to ensure the appropriate response if there is wildlife-human interactions on district land that may impact or be a problem with safety to either staff or to visitors in the preserve. And we developed these in partnership and with input from California Department of Fish and Game. And we developed these, or began working on them in the mid-90s after we had some coyote incidences on a preserve off the skyline. And we came up with these, and kind of the purpose of this is to understand and maintain the diversity of native wildlife in the preserves, and to protect the animal populations from human impact by reducing conflicts the best we can, or doing our part to try and reduce any chance of conflicts between humans and wildlife. And there's basically 3 steps that we'll go through. And the first one is notification and education, which is ongoing all the time. In some instances, we'll control human access to an area if there is a lot of activity. We'll restrict access for preserve users in that area, and we'll put up signs, and notification will be on the website and on the preserve. And then a third, kind of a last-ditch effort, something we don't want to have to do, but would be to control the wildlife presence or movement, and that'd be in the incident that, say, there was an attack, possibly a mountain lion or a coyote attack. Then we would contact Fish and Game, and most likely have a trapper come in if it was a dangerous animal and causing a lot of problems. But that's something we really don't want to get into, and we try not to do, because that is, kind of our purpose, is to provide habitat for the wildlife. And that's about all I have. There's the contact information there, the phone number for the office, and the website, an email address. you guys are interested, or if you have any other questions in the future, or like to report something. That's it. If you guys have any questions, we'd be happy to take them.
This is a mountain lion question.
Okay.
There was, someone thought they saw it or it jumped in or something on a trail last summer, I think it was, maybe summer before. And they brought a trapper in and they found no evidence.
That was actually on San Mateo County Parks or open space. That wasn't one of our preserves.
Oh,
They brought a trapper in, and after 2 to 3 days, they had found no tracks or no evidence to verify an attack.
Okay.
So
okay.
they called off the roll at that point.
Okay.
So, is there any other questions?
This isn't really a question, but I think there are a lot of people who don't know the difference between a cougar and a bobcat. And when they see a bobcat, they say, "Oh, I saw a mountain lion," and they freak out.
That's something we've been dealing with a lot, and a lot of the times, over the past 6 or 8 months, I've noticed at least once a week there's been Channel 2 News as there was a mountain lion sighting in Portola Valley, or, you know, and people a lot of times will confuse a bobcat from a coyote and a mountain lion, or even a domestic dog or cat, and instead of reporting it to fishing game or the local sheriff's department, or even to, you know, open space district, they just go right ahead and call the news. But you can tell the difference. I got pictures
Well, I
here.
can tell the difference, but they
But,
can't.
yeah, and that's part of the education process too, is just trying to educate people on the difference in these animals and their habitat and coexisting with them.
To be fair, when you see a big cat coming out of a tree, you kind of go, ah! You know, would it make a difference? A bobcat isn't going to bother you.
That's not true though.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, in the right circumstances, will, you know, they can't act aggressive if they have young with them, or, you know, if people are feeding them, or they're domesticated, or become used to people.
We've had an instance where the Los Altos Police Department called to warn us that there had been a sighting of a bobcat on Almonte Road. And this was a message left on my answering machine, so I called the police back and I said, "Yes, we know they live here."
But it's just important to know that this is their area, their habitat. We've encroached into their area, built houses up there, so we'll expect to see them. We should expect to see them, and consider ourselves blessed and lucky if we get to see a mountain lion or even a bobcat or coyote. Take one more.
The question about whether a coyote would jump over a 6-foot fence. Well, why would he want to?
Little white dog.
On the other side, if they know that there's food, or they can smell food on the other side, whether it be pet food or.
Would they be hungry enough to do that? Why? Why, of course. I mean, surely there's a multitude of food around here for them.
Just as Clayton said, I mean, if they smell something, and I mean, for a lot of predators, scaling a fence is not terribly difficult. So if they smell dog food, cat food, or see an animal that they think they can get, it's not a lot of effort to do that. So
It's easier to catch something in a fenced-in yard than running through the hills.
And this is very true. When you think about chasing a hare versus the energy expended for an animal, you know, versus going after a little fifi or fido, I mean, I hate to say that, but it's the true biological aspect. So it's all the more reason why we have to protect our domestic animals.
Okay, thank you guys for having me.
Well, thank you all for coming. You are genuinely appreciated. And do look at the display of literature in the back. And there's also a postcard if you're interested in ordering this film you just saw. So thank you, and Camilla, you were terrific. You really were. And we really appreciate it. And Clayton, thank you. We are very grateful for the 3 organizers of tonight's event. And thank you, wonderful people.